Greetings. You are now tuned into the Vault. Trust Christian own, nothing control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. We know that there's always going to be more people that listen in the replay than in the live, so we always appreciate everybody that does go back to the replay and listen to it. We always appreciate everyone. This is the Vault, episode 461. The What does generational wealth look like today? I definitely want to do this episode just because, we're in this space right now where, whether financial literacy was supposed to be the topic of the day, coming from the Vault's perspective, we have a perspective to give. It's no question, oh, well, how do you know they're talking truth? Well, when you're focused on privacy, you're focused on wealth. Wealth is in the private, it's not in the public. We could talk about the Forbes 400 list, the Forbes 100 list. People get on this list, and everybody knows that you get on the list for specific reasons. There's politics involved in this list. It's a private company. All these different things. Okay, so generational wealth. What does it look like today? A lot of people come to the vault, and this buzzword is thrown around. People want generational wealth, or they're building generational wealth. It's like the buzzword. Like if they're gonna sell a conference right now, they're gonna sell a conference for financial literacy, generational wealth, and the like. So we're gonna talk about it today. Where what does generational wealth look like today? It's pretty much look like the way it's looked for hundreds of years. Wealth is something that endures hundreds of years. It's not something that just gets broke down in a generation or two. If you want to talk about the numbers, we're going to talk about the numbers. If you want to talk about it from the perspective of what's generational wealth, that means that something is passed along. You can't just say, oh, well, we're going to do something here, but we're not going to have it perpetuated for generations. First of all, if it's generational wealth, you want to almost make it past what's called Gen 1. Gen 1 is the first generation to receive the wealth, second generation is to build on it, things of that nature. First gen is supposed to be building on it too. What does generational wealth look like today? You could almost say in what year that you're in. It's looked the same across the board for hundreds of years, which is it's private, it's quiet, it's looking to not be in the public, it's looking to build. Let's go into the numbers. Most people know, in generational wealth is definitely going to be over $10 million. Traditionally, people would like to say it's a high net worth investor, so they're talking $1 million, or they're talking $50 million, or they're talking a centimillionaire, which is $100 million. These are the type of numbers that you're talking for generational wealth. Some people would say, do they need to pass that along liquid cash? Some people would say, do they need to pass it along in an asset based position? What does generational wealth look like? It looks like a numbers involved. And it's not just passing along $100,000 house, or a $900,000 mortgage, or a $700,000 mortgage, or having enough assets in the portfolio to where you have enough mortgages to equal $1.2 million. So on paper it says you're worth $1.2 million with that asset, but in all actuality it's still a liability. It's still a debt encumbrance. So when you talk about generational wealth, you're definitely talking about free and clear, not just cash, but assets that are passed along from one generation to the next. Whether they're going to be $12 million in assets, $50 million in assets, $100 million in assets. There's some level of, okay, it would have taken a traditional family to build this generations. So you did it in one generation. So let's talk about it from that perspective of a lot of what we call not necessarily Gen 1s, but the wealth generator. Because there is a wealth generator, and then they call Gen 1 the first beneficiary generation. And then we talk about Gen 2. So when they talk about getting to Gen 3, you're actually talking about seeing 3 or 4 generations. You're going to see that. That's generational wealth. When you see 3 or 4 generations of people, it's not just one generation, it's not just 2 generations. We want to see 3 or 4 generations of wealth. This is how it's supposed to look. This is how it looks in the public. This is how it looks in the private. there are at least two to three or four generations deep at this point. Whether they're in America or whatever country they're in, that's what generational wealth looks like. It looks like it could be more than that for sure, but a lot of Americans may be first or second gen at this point. In the past 50 years, past 100 years, you see your first gen or second gen. First gen or second gen has sacrificed the most. First gen has sacrificed the most. The first gen, how can the first gen be a normal consumer when you're building wealth? They say you build generational wealth off the back of the consumer. So that lets you know that generational wealth mindset is completely different. Generational wealth actions are completely different than consumers, traditional consumers in the public. Well, what generational wealth looks like, it looks like, well, it sounds like we gotta get quite a bit of capital in the first gen. 10 million. Sounds like in a second gen we have to have at least 10 to 50 to $100 million. Oh wow, that sounds like a lot of money, Trust Christian in the vault. I've never heard anybody in my family have that type of money. I don't know anybody that has that type of money. Exactly. This is the lie that they're selling over the internet that, oh, if you're passing along a $1 million asset, that's a debt encumbrance. Or if you're passing along a $500,000 debt encumbrance, you're passing along assets to your family. Oh, if you pass a Rolls Royce on, well, it costs money to maintain that. Doesn't it even cost money to maintain it by it sitting in the driveway? Yes. So the best thing to do is to sell an asset if you don't have the money for the maintenance of it. If there's no generation of capital to pay for the maintenance of it, unless it's paying for itself, generational wealth. Oh, we're going to go from one generation to the next. I don't want my kids to do what they do what I do. This is a lot of people that say that from first gen. We've heard this across the board. A lot of people don't want to hear that. But the reality is, we've heard a lot of first gens, almost second gens, but first gen for sure, say they don't want their kids to do what they're doing. And that's neither here nor there, but just know there's a higher success ratio with people that go into industries of the sort or the like of their parents, partially because they've set the example, partially because they understand the dynamics, because they grew up with these dynamics, so they understand the dynamics of operating in these environments. Maybe they've been given a better education, so they're able to traverse into different various education environments and move in the sort. That would be your second gen. Your first gen, your first accumulator of the wealth, they're traditionally going to make a lot of sacrifices, and traditionally we're talking about look, if you want to say, well, who are the high paid employees that can pass along generational wealth, let's talk about it. Doctors, people that own huge practices. But how are you going to pass along generational wealth lying to yourself working a job? If you're not working for some major company generating $1 million a year, how are you going to pass along generational wealth? We're talking 10 million, 50 million, 100 million. Even if you worked every year for 50 years and you made $1 million and you saved $1 million, that means you got at the end of that period 50 million and you spent $1 million every year. Now, ladies and gentlemen, whether people know it or not, there are doctors that do that. There are lawyers that do that. Lawyers sometimes can make, big time lawyers, $1 million a year. Big time lawyer, $2 million a year. Big time lawyer, $9 million a year. They have some leeway to spend a little and save a little. Big time. Not just, oh, I come out, I'm trying to make $100,000 a year. How are you going to make generational wealth making $100,000 a year? These are the lies that are being perpetuated in public. Oh, let's sell you this generational wealth theory. You're not going to have to work 60 and 80 hours a week. What are you talking about? Generational wealth, what it looks like today is first gen most likely work 60 to 80 hours a week for 20 years of their life. You cannot say any multimillionaire or billionaire is not working 60 to 80 hours a week. The ones that you think that are on the internet that are making these monies, millions, they're putting in 60 to 80 hours a week. So if you're not putting in 60 to 80 hours a week, what generational wealth look like today? That's what it looks like. And if you're not doing that, there will be no, oh, I'm going to pass along 25 million, 50 million. That sounds like the lottery for most people. Generational wealth is a lottery pick for most people. So if you're going to build the generational wealth for the second gen and third gen and fourth gen and start a system of wealth, you're going to have to put in the big boy hours. It comes down to finding industries that you can actually make millions of dollars in. This is not, the vault's never said on the internet and perpetuated you're going to go generational wealthy over the internet and not have to make millions of dollars a year. But this is the perpetuation over the internet. Oh, you make if you just get in the system, go private. That's the first thing. Oh, go private. Do this with your birth certificate. All these different things. Where are you going to generate millions of dollars to pass along millions of dollars? What you going to save $32,000 a year in taxes? What you going to save $100,000 a year? So let's just say you saved $100,000 a year. You did that over 10 years. You only got $1 million. Oh, that's a lot. How? You could spend that in a year. You could live off that off of one account. But how are you passing along wealth? And how does that look like wealth? $1 million a year, is that relative to your family and where you come from? Or is that relative to what the numbers say are high net worth investors, generational wealth pass along investors, business owners, not just employees? Traditionally, we've seen high paid medical cardiovascular surgeons. Yes, medical people in the dentistry industry that they invest, they go into different sectors, and they invest. They're not just dentists anymore. Now they're investors. They can't just say they're dentists. Sometimes these dentists are making way more money in their dentistry than they are in their regular practice. Not to say they're doing it pro bono, but when you think about it, if a doctor, quote unquote, a dentist that owns a practice is diversifying into other industries, partially that are outside of their control, which is good. That's what generational wealth looks like. Oh, you're a doctor now, and you're what's that called? Diversifying into different industries. Not just think, why wouldn't they diversify in their own industry? Because they understand multiples. They understand that wealth is not one thing. There is no get rich quick. There is no lottery mentality. It's the end game. That's what we want to talk about today in this episode. What does generational wealth look like today? It looks like you, as the trustee, focused on the end game. So many people come to the vault and they say, is it gonna work? The system works because it's focused on the end game. Total control. Trust Christian. Own nothing, control everything. That's what it's all about. That's when you say, oh, well, what are the wealthy or the true wealthy of the world doing? They're trusting Christian, owning nothing, controlling everything. They're private. That's what it looks like today. The same thing has looked like for hundreds of years. That's what it looks like. What does generational wealth look like today? It looks like trust Christian, own nothing, control everything. It's private. They're not focused on owning anything. So are you focused on owning things? Still at this point in your life, oh, I'm trying to change my family curses. I'm trying to change the first generation issues. So how are you changing those things? And you know the end game is to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything. But are you changing your ways? Did you change your ways from I'm going from owning things, which the system told me to do, to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything? That's what generational wealth looks like today. Is it about you saving $50,000 on taxes? No. If that's your end game, think about how far you're thinking out just to save 50K a year. Well, I could put that 50 to work. That's true. Opportunity costs less. What does generational wealth look like? It looks like you have enough money to support two or three generations. in a normal people sense standard. If a person couldn't start out life with $1 million, they probably wasn't going to deserve it when they got older to have a sense to spend it. So they have accounts set up for family members. Generational wealth looks like, at least, it's almost like you set up a retirement account for a human before they're born, so they're living off retirement money as soon as they're born. That means they're making the average median income in the United States, which is 50 to 60K or less. They're not living off the highest, they're not living off the lows, they're living off the median income. If you're putting family members to where they're making CEO salaries, $100,000, $200,000, and they're 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, 25. These people are receiving more than the average of the population that they're in, and that can present not necessarily a problem, but that can present things of sharing with you. Oh wow, there is a situation where, hey, clearly these people are living off more than the average because of someone else. So could people squander it? Sure, maybe. What generational wealth looks like is you hear the old wily CEOs that still are in the marketplace, that are playing hard to get, as they call it. They say, "Oh, I'm not going to give money to my kids. I'm going to give it all away to charity." Lo and behold, somehow their children's companies or their children are somewhere affected by the means. Why? Because that's what generational wealth does. It diversifies. So even if your children are going to not necessarily come in the fold and do exactly what you're doing, the family traditionally takes a position of, we're going to go into industries that our family is moving into, fund that, and traditionally do their best to dominate in that industry if they haven't been already being accused of antitrust acts in the first gen, where they try to create a monopoly. What generational wealth look like today? It looks like that. Now we know people that their families have pretty much become well off in first gens. Well, second gen has going to have to carry the torch. There is no, oh, we're going to create generational wealth and the second gen doesn't carry the torch. This is why at our last conference we had someone that was third gen. We had to bring someone in third gen just to show you it can get deep. And we've sat in a room with 5 gens before. We've sat in a room with 7 to 11 gens in the room. You might say that's unbelievable. Oh man, this sounds unbelievable. Trust Christian Vault, 5 gens of people in banking, private banking. Yes, many more. And they say, oh man, I'm trying to put generational wealth together. Do you think your family's going to last really 5 gens? That might seem a hard case for some people. Oh man, I'm building generational wealth. I'm going to at least leave something for the next gen. Yeah, but are you going to get 5 gens deep? See, these are the things that when people are truly building it, they're thinking about that. What's the end in mind? Are they thinking about 5 gens out? Are they thinking about 7 gens out? Are you thinking of 11 gens out? The decisions that you make based off the end game will affect your rate now. That shows that your end game is directing your thoughts. The end game is directing your habits. The end game is directing how you feel about the everyday woes when you're going and focused on the end game. The end game is generational wealth. Perpetuate it. Whether you're the first gen, second gen, third gen, or we're sitting in a room with, third gen. They're sitting there saying, hey, I'm carrying the torch because that's just something that I'm interested in doing. Whereas you're not catching them say, I'm taking it easy, that type of rock steady. They're not. Oh, what's taking it easy? These people are in the third gen still working 60 hours. Oh man, third gen, 60 hours? Oh no, I didn't hear that. You did. Third gen, 60 hours. Third gen, Definitely pushing 60, easy over 60, because they're building on the family wealth, whether it is passing along 10 million, whether it's passing along 25, 50 million, 100 million. They're not sitting on their woes. They're not sitting on the family name. They're focused on what? Doing what? Getting more wealth for the family. So they're putting in the hours. Are you going to perpetuate that to the third and fourth and fifth gen? Or is it going to be a hodgepodge of, hey, we're going to see how one gen does it for the next gen? Really? You think that's how it's going to be built? If that was the case, look at your previous family history. There has been no defined asset management plan. But when you have a defined asset management plan for your family, when you hear families such as the one that we interviewed at the last conference, and we say, how often do you meet with your family? And they say, we meet once a month for investment practices. These are the things that wealthy families do when you talk about passing along wealth from one generation to the next. That's not a maybe, that's a practice. It's a best practice for the people that aren't first, aren't second, and definitely not third. So when you're not third gen, you take notes from third gen. Third gen is already shared in the room. Hey, look, we meet with our family 12 times a year, minimum. No if, ands, or buts about it. Do we do the Zoom call conferencing? Of course, we may have to do a conferencing. Why? Because every family member may not be present at that particular meeting because of geographical situations. That's fine. But there's a level of accountability to making it to the call and making it to the meetings, and specifically if you want to invest with the family who's literally showed you that, yes, grandparents have money and maybe first gen has for money. But we're down to third gen now. And that means if we're going to keep anything going, we got to show up and show out. And they have. But if you think that you're going to say, hey, I want to make it easier for my kids, they don't need to work 60 hours a week. Why do you think we bought the third gen in the room? We bought the third gen in the room to share with you. This is an ex-Olympic athlete. This is somebody that knows all about the sacrifice. You don't go to the Olympics and not make sacrifices. So when you come into business and you're managing generational wealth, you don't come in it and not put in and make the sacrifices. Yes, they're working for you think this is a regular job managing millions of dollars a year? It's not. Best practices from a third gen, from a macro. Hey, meet with your family once a month. Whether they have to Zoom conference in or not, meet with your family once a month. Oh man, I'm building generational wealth though. So many people say, oh, my family, they don't want to meet. Well, you already know how the generational wealth situation is going to go. Because we're bringing in people that are living it, that have the best practices. The best practice say you do it once a month. That's a best practice. Not trust Christian just in the vault. It's trust Christian on not to control everything. That's what it really is. And that's what they're doing. When they're telling you, oh, yeah, we have a family trust. And oh, yeah, we invest from this position. That's what they're telling you. That's what they're saying. We're sitting in the room hearing the topic come up more and more, but we still see the LLCs pop up more and more. We always see this. It's hilarious. Oh, we got the you hear it all the time. You hear it all the time. But the various entities, you know, we sat on the line with someone today, whether y'all know it or not. People that have this type of, when y'all call generational wealth, they don't want anyone to know. Why trust Christian and Vault do you talk about it? Because there's publications that talk about wealth management. That's what we talk about. We talk about the best practices of wealth management at the Vault. So we're not saying what you should or have to do. So we sit around the lawyers and the accountants. We sit around the ex-CPAs, the lawyers, and whatever these guys you want to call them, certified public accountants. Okay. So if they're here to enable their client and take their client to the next level, truly to enable their client, why don't they just open up the whole gambit of financial vehicles to you? Well, we could state the case for them. It's because they say that you have to meet a certain income criteria. That's what generational wealth is all about. You have to meet a certain income criteria. Oh, we're not going to give you these entities, because you don't have enough money yet. That's what they say. So we sit on the line with these guys, these lawyers, these accountants. It's one of those things where you're supposed to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything, right? Right. So why do your lawyers tell you, well, what happens? How you gonna buy assets in your name still? And you sitting thinking like, okay, but I want to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything. But then these lawyers and accountants are telling me, how am I gonna own assets in my name still? And that's how you know they're public, and that's how you know the vault's private. Simple as that. You, Christian at trustchristian.com. That's the email. It's that simple. Other than that, what are these guys saying to you? I want to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything, because I know that that's the position. That's my end game. How do you think you start the way you gonna finish? But these guys they got the licenses. Oh well, you got what they say. You got to have a certain amount of money. Is that the same with every lawyer? No. Is that the same with every accountant? No. That's called a gimmick. Okay. So we're going to do generational wealth. How much does it cost to get in these vehicles? We had a client come on the line recently, says, I got about 5 million in net worth. I'm looking to get to 10 so I can set my sales. And guess what the doofus lawyer said? Well, yeah, when you get to 10 million, that's when you should go private. And you should trust Christian and own nothing, control everything. Until then, keep dealing with us. And we're going to keep you in a living trust. And we're going to keep you in a revocable trust. And we're going to keep you in the public sector so you can be sued out of assets. That's what they said. Client says, well, I want to trust Christian, own nothing, control everything. That's what I want to do. And they say, well, if you trust Christian, own nothing, control everything, you won't be able to buy a house in your name anymore. If you trust Christian, own nothing, control everything, you won't be able to buy a car in your name. Well, is Donald Trump paying for his own cars? Is Donald Trump paying for his own houses? Have you seen his salary? Oh man, he's a multi-billionaire. He's a net worth billionaire, and he's not paying anything out of pocket because he knows how to have his affairs structured properly. When you talk about, oh, well, what about well, even any Wiley CEO, any old school CEO has their company set up that way. Fringe benefits, as they call it. Oh, when the car companies supposedly were going bankrupt, how do you pull up in G5 jets? The government wasn't having it. Or you're pulling up bankrupt, but you're pulling up with jets. That's how it works. I'm sorry the government didn't know that. But it didn't look good. So they came back in SUVs the second time asking for money. But they pulled up the first time in jets. They didn't pull up literally to the White House asking for money or Congress, but they flew in on private jets. And the companies were begging for money or asking for money. So back to generational wealth. Okay. How do these companies get away with these type of things? How do people get away with these type of things? Well, they made sure that their business was structured properly. We were looking at some gimmick once again on the internet. We did an episode recently on uh, what's the best state to set up an LLC in, and we saw someone do like some little third party platform, cut it up into like 30 seconds and tell you that you should create a entity in one of these states. And it was just interesting because whether y'all know it or not, it's like, is it legal advice or is it not? Oh, it's not legal advice. Okay, so then what difference does it make? The gov is going to say, anybody that's in the public is going to say, well, what difference does it make what state you have it in? Well, this individual say, oh, you should go to this state because you could set up an anonymous corporation. Like, listen to this type of buffoonery. Go to a lawyer and say that. Don't let these people sit over the internet and play games with you. Oh man, You could set up an anonymous corporation in this state. Okay, so Trust Christian Revolt, we're going to add to the conversation. We're going to add to the sizzle. We're going to add to the spice. Because guess what? They're going to throw you a little bit of sugar and a little bit of rice. They making you think like it's a party. Oh, you going to go set up a corporation in this state, right? And it's supposedly an anonymous owner state, right? So supposedly you can go set up a corporation in a state and the owner's going to be anonymous. Okay, that was the first mess up. Because first of all, you don't need a lawyer to do that. That's fair. But when you go into the bank and you try to open up a bank account, they're going to ask you who's the owner of the corporation. Oh, Trust Christian Revolt, you thinking too much. No, we're right here on top of it because we understand business. We're not trying to sell TikTok videos or any other things. We don't need clicks. We're actually doing consultations, having a real consultation with people and going over their particular situation that's germane to their situation, and it not being what's considered arbitrary advice, or is it legal advice? But they can't claim that it's legal advice. Maybe they put a disclaimer in their bio too, and they say, "Oh, it's not legal advice." But okay, they say, but it definitely didn't sound like complete information. Why? Because anyone would tell you with any sense that's either been in business for a while or not. Traditionally, if they've been in business for a while, they're gonna say, "Well, maybe you should make sure you have a lawyer around when you open up a corporation. Not that it's always needed, but it's encouraged." Okay, great. So if you're gonna open up this corporation in another state, if it is in another state, maybe it's in the state you're in, but let's just say you're going to do it in this so-called anonymous owner jurisdiction. Okay, if you do it in that jurisdiction, once again, when you go into the bank and they say, well, who's the owner of the company, what are you going to be saying? Now, it's unfortunate that this person puts out these type of contents over the internet and they're able to say these type of things, and then it's not founded upon the back end, which is the most important part. Anybody can say, oh, if you go into business for yourself, you can make $1 million. True. We also said on this episode you can make $1 million being an employee or being a lawyer for a big major company. So there are, whether there's advantages or not, there's many ways to do many things. But to just say, oh, well, if you go to this state and you can do an anonymous, these are the best two states to do it in, or these are the best states to do it in. How is it the best state if it's not the best for that person? And once again, what if they don't know how to operate that way? But these are the type of tips in the financial literacy they got floating around on the internet. Oh man, they ain't Trust Christian in the vault. What are they talking? Oh well, go into trusteeship. Yeah, right. Who's gonna create it? You? I created my own documents. We had people reach out to us for years now. I created my own trust. I created my own trust. I created my own trust. That's what they say. We got to repeat it so you can bear the witness that you might could say, well, I did the same exact thing. And for you saying that, it's a personal trust. That's a public trust. It's not a private one. Because private is trust Christian or not to control everything. That's all. We understand what generational wealth is at the vault. That's why the vault does well. Is because we understand what it's about. It's trust Christian or not to control everything. That's what it's about. Not trust Christian by himself. It's own nothing, control everything. When you have it could be borderline socialist, but it's not. It can't be, because when you operate from this philosophy, this is where you actually do see they created mechanisms in the system to create philanthropy. So when you hear wealthy people say, oh, I'm going to give money to charity, think about it. They put a system in place to say we're going to give to ourselves. That's giving to philanthropy, giving to themselves. But oh, no, they're not just trying to give to themselves. Okay, when you pass away, ladies and gentlemen, you are passed away. So who's the money going to go to? Well, it goes to your school. Some people actually have schools named after them because they have a mission that's going on. They wanted to perpetuate it. That's how they live on. That's how generational wealth is passed along. They put their name, maybe, I want to give a donation. That's what you think it is because you're in the public. It's not a donation. It's an endowment in the private. Oh, I heard that from Trust Christian Vault, the private endowment. I may have heard about these things. I've heard about the board at the schools and at the alumni association at these schools. And they run the board at these schools. The schools are running generational wealth. Why would they not? The schools are holding generational wealth. They're holding someone's perpetual investment with the school so the school doesn't go under, so the school doesn't care about head count, so the school can always have the lawn manicure regardless of the student head count. Generational wealth looks like today is putting your money into the system that works where in whatever jurisdiction you're in. So if you're in the states, you got to go ahead and be okay with it. Oh man, I gave my money to charity. That's what you did. I gave my money to charity. That's what generational wealth looks like today. That's what it looks like today. It looks like you gave your money to charity. And they want you to think this, right? Right. But when you got first gen going to college for free, generation going to college for free, third generation going to the same college for free, fourth generation going to college, this might be a good college now. Might be a name brand college. That's what it looks like. Maybe you gave to multiple schools. See, we can sit here and talk about generational wealth all day because we love it. The only unfortunate part about it is the public doesn't love it. They want to condemn it. We've seen people go from zero to hero for many people. We just said they got schools named after these people. Oh, I was an ex-slave, and they got a school named after them. That's called generational wealth. How come they didn't go under? And they were ex-slave. Were you really born into that? They were ex-slave. I started a school. I started something that has allowed people for financial and economic empowerment. The ones that y'all think sitting over the internet selling you the $49 program, the $150 program, the $1,000 program, the $20,000 mastermind, the $40,000, $50, $1,000 mastermind. But then you got people that they're their example of generational what? Hold on. Their first gen, they were an ex-slave and they got a school named after them. You don't get the school named after you because you were Haagen Dogs or you were Heinz. They didn't get the school named after them because they were someone special. They got the school named after them because they built something and gave it to charity. They gave their money to the public. The public, which y'all think are public colleges, are still privately endowed. Oh man, that's a public college right there. I went to a public college. It's a public college. And then when you go and read the books, when you see how the money is really on the books, because most people don't go look at the books, they don't see how there is a private board of trustees that manage funds, that allocate funds to just keep things afloat. Not to get things exceptionally better, but to keep things at the status quo. So guess what? Their name can stay on the side of a building. They're going to keep power washing that building because someone gave their money to what? Charity. How does that look like if you're only, oh, okay, man, I'm only going to give $1 million to my kids? How does that look? How does that look like generational wealth? Oh, I mean, I'm only going to give $5 million to my kids. Is that really generational wealth? But what it does look like is what we said. Oh, I'm giving it away to charity. And that's why you've never worked next to any of their last names. I don't work next to anyone last name Gates. I don't work next to anyone last name Rockefeller. I don't work next to anyone last name Kennedy. I don't, make sure you got sprinkles of different. We're talking about the bloodlines that they've said we have put a generational wealth system in place. We put that in place. Is that what it looks like? Christian at trustchristian.com. So what we do at the Vault for Trustee Training is those best practices. Go over those best practices. Some people, they come and they say, "Oh, I'm in trust already." That's obviously going to be a wolf cry. Hey, I'm already in trust. Well, okay. Do you have a system set up in place once again that even says you're supposed to be having meetings once a month? Oh, well, I heard about that and I'm going to do it. I was going to do it. I'm going to get around to it. That's what we hear. Well, the vault puts a structured system in place immediately. It's a system that says these are the steps to building that for sure. Because anybody can get you in the car, but do you have the manual? Oh man, I saw these books on the internet floating around. Whether you know it or not, the trust instrument is the governing instrument. But how many people know that? How many people they're focused and locked in on that? They're not. The corporate governing instrument. Don't you hear it on the public? They say the governing instrument, the mandate. It's the governing instrument. But are you looking at that as an officer of the company? Are you looking at that as a senior member of the company? Are you looking at that so you can see what your powers are and what your powers are not? What can you do as an officer? Somebody says, "Oh, you go into a different state, you don't have to name yourself as the owner and the officer of the company." And then when you go into the bank, you're gonna run into, what's his name, Lawrence Taylor. You're gonna run into some guy that's gonna hit you. And we don't mean literally, but figuratively. Because when you walk in a bank and you say, "Oh yeah, this is a regular corporation, right?" It is. That's what you think. How is it regular? And not every state has the anonymous owner situation, right? So that's a little different. So when you walk into states and you try to open up bank accounts in states that aren't familiar with that process, you don't think you're gonna run into a wall? Nah, but they got a little video for it, right? No, they don't have a video for it because they're almost selling you the idea of setting up an entity in these states. Well, is there better states for estate planning tax purposes? They say we say you got to start with the end in mind. The end in mind. Okay, well we're gonna go anonymous. That hey, we're not mad at that. So we're gonna go anonymous. Does that mean you're gonna go and do business in that state for real? Oh, they're set up in these states, these corporations. Well, they are major corporations, yeah. And they also got lawyers in those environments. Do you have lawyers in those environments? Do you have a business litigation lawyer in those environments? Did they tell you that? No, no, no. Just go get a corporation in that state because you'll go get a lawyer that's barred in another state and they supposed to know about it, right? I mean, that's kind of like the dummy test, but I'm not too smart because I graduated and I really didn't get all the education in business, but I'm talking to people that don't really know. So I'm trying to sell them my package so they can buy my little educational package on something and over the internet and tell you to open up a corporation and you can have an anonymous owner state. And why are most Fortune 500s in these states? Well, for many reasons. But whether you know it or not, they definitely have good litigation. We're not discouraging it, ladies and gentlemen. We just want to give highlight to the point. We want to know, are you okay with even having that conversation? Because that is a conversation when you talk about those type of things. Because we already know that that's what they're going to run into when you make these type of blanket statements over the internet for people to be able to go do. Because is it legal advice? Because if that's the case, it's almost like legal advice. Like, hey, if you do this, we all should be able to do it. Nah, it ain't that easy. We promise you that. At the vault, we ain't selling you that type of juice. That ain't the good juice. We promise you that. Why? Because the average entrepreneur, and whether they're starting out trying to build a mom and pop or whatever, they're trying to get money maybe. Whether you want to talk about redlining in different jurisdictions for businesses, we can talk about that. But let's be very direct that when you talk about setting up an entity in another state, we'll tell you straight up. Okay, for example, we'll have clients come to us. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, we're investing in Chicago. We're doing investments in Chicago." Okay, so because they're investing in Chicago in real estate, they actually had to create, or this is what their lawyers told them, that they had to create a entity in Chicago. Otherwise, there's a foreign tax on entities that are, once again, it's from another state. So it's a foreign entity in that jurisdiction, and that's how Chicago looks at it. So their laws for foreign entities acquiring real estate is definitely a little bit different. The tax laws are a little bit different. And so that is how they're administered, especially if you're making money in another jurisdiction and you're considered a foreign, not you or the entity is considered a foreign entity and a from coming from another jurisdiction. And not only that, you're trying to go in this foreign jurisdiction and say, oh yeah, we're not going to state who the owners are. Not to say you're not Fortune 500, but do you have people that can walk in there that ain't going to be the owner? Because that's the case. You say, oh, it's a go open up an entity in some anonymous owner jurisdiction. Give us a break. Do you know that's one of the worst pieces of advice people could give people? Oh, go do that. So then when you go do it, once again, do you have legal representation in that jurisdiction? Do you even know that when you're acquiring assets in other jurisdictions, they consider it a foreign entity? Oh no, the doofus stole the internet didn't tell me that. They were selling me a color scheme. Exactly. That's the unfortunate part. And if we got to sit over the internet, loudmouth and speaker, just to talk, to talk and have the conversation. It's not contentious. It's to have the conversation because to give someone once again that advice is very bad. It's malicious actually. We don't advocate. Oh, you got to go into trusteeship. You don't advocate that you have to. They got these videos over the internet. Oh, this is how you're supposed to manage your asset. Well, are you a lawyer? Are you an accountant? We're not saying that they know everything, but when you get a medical opinion, don't you get more than one? Right. But then we got these videos. Oh, just go into this entity. Everything will be sweet. What about them promoting the management practices? That's what we promote at the Vault. The management practices. It's about the business management, not about just the vehicle. Christian at trustchristian.com. That's why we're here to serve. Serving for people that are, whether you're in trusteeship already or wanting to get in trusteeship. It is business management consulting. Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, that's Christian at trustchristian.com. It's always going to be that. And whether y'all know it or not, the private is sweeter than you could ever imagine. It's not just the utopia. It's not the cornucopia. It's not the Maricopa. It is everything you've imagined and better. It's unfortunate that people have bought into we have to play one side of the game when there's more than one ways to do things. And just because you were born in a public doesn't mean you have to stay in a public. But oh no, I don't want to unplug. Well, I don't know. I got to learn a lot of new stuff. I got a radical change. I got to do all this change that other people around me aren't doing. Right, because you're first generation wealthy. You're first gen. It's the hardest for first gen. But then we sit in a room with third gens and tell us they're working their face off too. And that's what it's all about. Oh man, is it about sitting back on the fruits of your labor? It's actually about passing something along where you can say you're 3 G's deep, where you can say you're 5 G's deep, and they're still administered, where you can say they're 7 gens deep, where you can say they're 9 gens deep, where you can say they're 11 gens deep, where you can say we're thinking that far ahead, that we got that type of mission on our hands, and we look forward to seeing the generations get it done. To put in the work, to keep it and uphold it, that they are willing to make the sacrifice like we did first gen. And yes, all we did was give them the inside helping hand. That's what generational wealth looks like today. Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, that's Christian at trustchristian.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Peace.